Hello and welcome back to the Fly Team recapping Day 11 of the Men's World Championship happening in Stockholm, Sweden, hurting Denmark. So hop into today, of course, the scores from today's game, starting with a 3-1 victory for Slovenia over France. Now, coming into this game, if you remember back to yesterday's video, we were talking about it a little bit more, but this game decided the relegation spot in Group A. The winner of this game would stay up at the tournament for 1 year longer. The loser would be sent down to Division 1A and being relegated. So this game, lots to play for these two teams, and we saw quite a bit of that. I think when you look at the way these two teams matched up, on paper, I would have favored France, especially at the start of this tournament. But as this tournament went onward, we saw the Slovenian team slowly but surely pick it up and find their groove. And they're playing strong defensive hockey and finding gaps, finding their offensive chances, and in many ways burying those offensive chances, which in my eyes was one of the biggest things about the Slovenian team that posed the threat to a team like France, who not necessarily hasn't been playing well, but has been giving up those kind of chances. And for France today, we saw that become a problem. And for Slovenia rather, we'll talk about Hungary in a little bit, but for Slovenia, this was the game that mattered. And we talk about it a lot at these tournaments. It's the game that matters. France and Slovenia today, this was their game that mattered. And for Slovenia, they brought it. And you look at that first period, they came out guns a-blazing. And you think back to their game yesterday against Austria. Yes, they lost, but it was the way that they played, which I think really set the tone for this game. And you saw that in the first period where, in many ways, Slovenia outplayed France and was the better team, and not only came out with a 2-0 lead, but it was that original power play, that 5-on-3 where you get 2 penalties on the same play and you capitalize on the one, but you also set the momentum going, that you have the momentum with you now. And we saw that through that entire first period where Slovenia just dominated play. And then, of course, they scored the second one shortly thereafter, and then they're up 2-0 going into the break. And for a team like France, they're clawing at this point. And we saw that, in that second and third period, where it was desperation time for the French. And unfortunately, they just couldn't seem to get much going. And they had a lot of chances, just couldn't find it past the Slovenian goaltender. So for France today, they ran into a hot goaltender. And unfortunately, in their game that matters, they just couldn't pull it off. They score one with the empty net, and then they get scored one on the empty net. So for Slovenia, this is the exact game they needed to play today to beat this French team. And as much as it might seem like an upset, if you've been watching this tournament these last couple days especially, this really isn't much of an upset. And you kind of think back to that one game against Finland where, for France, they led in that game and they got the early lead and they held on. And that was kind of the difference between that game and this game where, for France, they never seemed to get that foothold in, and then they couldn't really get back to their structured game. And that's what really hurt them in the long run here, is that original 5-on-3 power play. Very tough to come back from. So for France today, an unfortunate game for them. Yes, they do lose 3-1 as your final to Slovenia. Then to the second game of the day, and this is why I hate starting in Group A, because, well, it happened. And it happened again. Canada loses again in a shootout. A 2-1 final against Finland here. And this game, I would say, is sort of a combination of a lot of factors. And I don't want to put it on Canada in this game because Finland really played well, and they played a very good game today. But a lot of people have been watching the Canadian games and saying, this team's going to take the entire tournament. This is a wash of a tournament. And I've been responding to, I think, just about every comment that said that with, hold your horses, wait till they play a good team like a Finland or a Sweden. Not to say the other teams in Group A aren't good, but not to the level they'll be facing in those quarterfinals. And I just think that when you look at the way Finland played Canada today, it was exactly how they needed to win. And credit to the Finns, they knocked away a lot of and sort of controlled a lot of the Canadian offensive pushes. And that's exactly what they needed to do to force overtime and eventually force the shootout. But, they played their full style of game, and really 5-on-5, they neutralized this Canadian team, which has been so good in that area. And not to take away from the goaltending as well, Saros was great again today, but for the Canadians, this could be a game they look back on and say, well, if only we would have got that spot in Group A. Because now, all of a sudden, if France can beat Slovakia, likely, in regulation, and Canada loses in regulation to Sweden, possibility, then you'll see Finland, of course, jump to that second spot in Group A, putting Canada into the third spot, meaning they'll have to play the second spot in Group B, assuming, of course, Denmark wouldn't beat Germany, because then it'd be 1v4, which would then lead to the groups. But we'll hold that for just a few minutes. But for Canada in this game, yes, they lose to the Finns, but I don't think it's reason to panic. Yes, it's unfortunate, and yes, those aren't the games you want to lose, but it's not the end of the world. It's not as bad as some people might make it out to be. Just take a deep breath. It's early in the tournament still. They still need a wake-up call. This is going to be their wake-up call. But if they start to play poorly against Sweden, then the alarm bells should start ringing. And if you want to see a funny video and Canada loses tomorrow, be sure to come back, because it's going to be a hectic one. But for Finland today, exactly as they needed to, keeping the game tight right to the very end, and that's how Finland's going to win these games. They're not going to outscore teams like Canada or Switzerland or Czechia or the U.S. or Sweden. They're going to keep the game close, and they're going to battle their way through, and that's exactly what they did here today. So a 2-1 shootout victory for Finland over Canada as the second game in Group A. We'll now move to the news in Group A. We'll start here with France, who is relegated from this tournament. They will be sent back down to Division 1A for next year's tournament, with hopes of promotion to come back up the following year. But for France, an unfortunate tournament for them. And you look at a lot of what could have happened, and they've played some very good games at this tournament. And I think the one that I always have circled is that game against Finland, where they win that game. That momentum might have been a little bit different. So for France, as much as they might lose, there are some moments of this tournament to be proud of. And then we'll move now to Slovenia with the hot streak. And you look at their last two games, the French game and the Austrian game, where those are the kind of games for Slovenia that they wanted to play well, and they wanted to make an impact. And they certainly did that. And I think as far as the Slovenian pride part, and we talked about it yesterday, the two things Slovenia wants out of this tournament is, one, to play with pride, and two, not get relegated. And they achieved both those things. And I think for Slovenia, this was the exact game they needed to play today. You get out to the early lead, and then you collapse. You suffocate France away and wait for them and pounce on every one of their mistakes. And that's exactly what happened today. And as much, all credit to the Slovenian team, because they earned their win every step of the way. And unfortunately for France, just couldn't quite find the back of the net in this one. So for Slovenia, they will stay up at this tournament for at least one more year. A big credit to them. Obviously, a huge accomplishment for them, but still doesn't end our relegation watch party, as we will be seeing that the relegation in Group B happen tomorrow as well, so something to keep an eye on there. But we'll move to the third piece of news from today with Canada, who was shooted out. And this is, of course, a pun on shootout. I know it's not actually shooted out, but for Canada, this has been a storyline at these kind of tournaments. And I'll throw up something I tweeted out, because I got bored, did a little bit of research. And so the last time Canada won a shootout game at these IIHF events for the World Juniors, it was 2015, December 29th against Switzerland. They've been 0-3 in shootouts since. For the men's Worlds, they haven't won one since May 15th, 2023. 2 years ago, they've been 0-3 since. For the men's Olympics, a little bit longer, obviously, with the 4 years. 2010 against Switzerland was their last time they won a shootout game. They've been 0-1 since. Women's Olympics, they've never won a shootout game. They're 0-1 since then. They've 0-1 career against them. And then for the Women's Worlds, their last win was their most recent shootout against the USA with 0-0, of course, with their last win since the win. But it's been this storyline for this Canadian team. And whenever it gets to a shootout, it seems like they're cursed. And is it cursed? I don't know. But it just feels like as soon as you put the game to a shootout, Finland is going to come in, or whoever they might be playing is going to come in and take it. And for this Canadian team, they had so many opportunities in overtime to finish. And you look at whether it be the McKinnon break, the Crosby backdoor, there's a couple other chances in there that they very much could have finally and capitalized on, but they just kind of fell short. And that was, in my eyes, the biggest blemish of their game today. Was not as much, the way they played. Finland's a team that's going to defend you hard. And even I said yesterday, if this game gets close, don't be surprised for it to go either way. But that's exactly what I was expecting from the game, because the Finns play teams hard. You look at how they played Sweden. they'll allow you to take 50 plus shots, but they're going to save most of them because they're all sort of perimeter shots. Credit to Canada today. They did get some good looks in tight, but unfortunately not enough to find the back of the net. So, that was just part of the game plan from Finland. And then, you get to overtime when everything spreads out a little bit more. And unfortunately, they just couldn't find the back of the net despite numerous chances. So as much as, the curse of the shootout still lives for Canada, now it's going to be interesting to see sort of what goes on, because it's dangerous time for them. And now it's a matter of if they're going to, of course, make it far in this tournament, which I think is now going to start to come into question for them, because you really never know. And then we'll go to Finland with It's a Trap, talking about, of course, the Star Wars quote, but also the way that they play. And they play that trap style of hockey that's so effective against North American teams, whether it be Canada, the U.S., and even more recently Sweden, who's kind of adapted to that game. And that's exactly what you see from this Finnish team. Is they're not going to, try and score 150 goals. They're going to play good defensive hockey. And I think you'll see Canada come out tomorrow with a little bit more juice, and it will look a lot more efficient in the offensive end, just because they're not playing a team like the Finns, where they do such a good job of clogging up the middle and preventing high quality chances. So for Finland, keeping their trap style going, it's been working for this tournament. Yes, it has some trouble sometimes when you're playing against some of the weaker teams, just because they don't do what teams are supposed to do, and in many ways they also play defensive hockey, which spreads you out a little bit more. But for Finland, if they can continue to do that, find chances off the rush, sneak that guy in on the breakaway like they've done so well at this tournament, then all of a sudden it's still a potential for Finland to do well at this tournament. I honestly think, depending on where they end up here in the quarters, don't be surprised to see a little bit of magic fly. So that's what we have here for the news from Group A. We'll now shift over to Group B. We'll start here with a 5-0 victory for Czechia over Germany. Now, this was a game, I think the score, the problem with Germany at this tournament is they've played well in these games. They just haven't quite found the results. And as much as, this game didn't mean a ton for them, because tomorrow it's win or go home anyway. You get the 3 points. Big whoop doesn't actually do that much for you in the standings. But I think this is more of a pride kind of game for this German team. And I think when you look at the way Germany's been playing, they've found ways to be competitive against some of the better teams at this tournament. And today was no different. Unfortunately, they just found themselves on the other side of a Czech push that just seemed to find the back of the net every time they had those opportunities. And for the Czechs, they played another great game today, and they more or less dominated another game against a really good team. And, you'll see them against the U.S. tomorrow, which I think is going to be that test that we've all been waiting for. And yes, Switzerland was a good team, but I think that U.S. game is going to really show them what they're going to be up against, especially on the other half of the group, where when you play the U.S., you're playing a similar team to a team like Canada and Sweden, where a team like Switzerland is a little bit closer to a team like a Czech or a Finland, where they're playing with more structure. Those are the kind of games that I'm looking for the Czechs to really play well in. I'll be curious to see what Czech team comes out tomorrow, because if they can find, against the U.S., those gaps, and structure their game well enough to sort of find those traps and get those counter rushes, they'll be just fine. But if they start to allow the U.S. to get going, that's when it's going to get dangerous. And we'll talk more about the game tomorrow in a little bit, but the Czechs have played really well at this tournament. I hope to see it continue. And then to the second game of the day we go with Norway and Hungary. A 1-0 victory for Norway over Hungary. Very similar to what we were just talking about over in Group A with the relegation. This game for Norway was a must-win in regulation. So what that means, of course, is that if Hungary would have tied this game late, they would have had to pull their goalie. And I think you look at how tight this game was right to the very end. Norway takes a late penalty and nearly loses their lead. I think it was 4 minutes or 5 minutes, or however much time was left on the clock. But those are the games for Norway that they have to find ways to close out. And credit to them, they did it. They found their way through. And for a team like Hungary, they knew coming into this game, they've already won their game that matters. Kazakhstan's going to play the Swiss tomorrow, and pending any crazy game where Kazakhstan gets a point, Hungary should still be okay. And I think for Hungary, they didn't play with that kind of desperation that we've seen from them in that game against Kazakhstan, which is fine, because frankly they don't need the points. But that was kind of the difference in my eyes for this game, was Norway needed those points, and you saw them sell out to block shots at the very end of this game. That was the key for Norway, was that desperation factor, and it really played a big role. And yes, there's not much to talk about with the 1-0 game, but the way Norway held their lead, especially late in that game, you could see the desperation settling in, that they knew that they had to hold that lead right to the very end, and sure enough, they did, picking up the 1-0 victory for Norway. So that'll do it for our games. We'll now move over to our news with the Czechs, who has Group B in sights, and they're looking to try and win that top spot in Group B, and they'll have the opportunity tomorrow in their control to win the spot. Of course, if they can find the regulation win, if they can find a win in any fashion, as a matter of fact, they will get the top spot. So I think for this Czech team, they want to win this game, not only to win the top spot in the group, but also to set the tone for the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals. They want to be known as the team to beat at this tournament. And, we already saw Canada get knocked that off today. And I think for the Swedes, very similarly, we'll see them sort of battle it out with Canada tomorrow, and it'll be a real tight game. But I think the Czechs are one of those teams that has the ability to be the team to beat at this tournament, and we'll see what they can do tomorrow against the U.S. As for Germany, it is do or die tomorrow, as they'll play Denmark. We'll talk a little bit more and preview that game in just a little bit, but for Germany, do or die, they must win the game to avoid getting sent down, or to avoid missing the quarterfinals, rather. And in many ways, that's going to be the decider. And I think for this German team, we're going to see if they're going to play with that desperation that we've seen in front of a tough home crowd Danish team. Should be an interesting one there. As for Hungary, with the Swiss fans, they're Swiss fans for a day, and as long as Switzerland can beat Hungary or beat Kazakhstan rather in regulation, they will be just fine. But if the game goes to overtime, or if Kazakhstan somehow pulls off the unlikely win, then all of a sudden Hungary will be the team sent down to the relegation, back down to Division 1A, which would be unfortunate for them. As for Norway, with they are staying up, and with the big win today, the 1-0 regulation win at that, they will stay up at this tournament for at least a year longer. So credit to them. They won the game that matters today. But obviously this tournament hasn't been quite friendly to this Norwegian team, where you look at their game against Kazakhstan off the top of the tournament. Those are the games you really want to win, so you can avoid this sort of scenario late in the tournament. So for Norway, it's a win today. It's great. They ended up getting to where they needed to be, but still a little bit of a stressful situation there. So that's what we got here for the news. We'll now flip into our standings. We'll start here in Group A, where we'll find Sweden in first place with 18 points, Canada in second with 16, Finland in third with 13, Latvia in fourth with 9, Austria in fifth with 7, Slovakia in sixth with 7. Remember, Austria does own the tiebreaker over Slovakia. Slovenia in seventh with 4 points, and France, who will be relegated, in the last spot in Group A with 1 point. Then to Group B, we will go with the Czechs in first place with 17, Switzerland in second with 16, USA in third with 14 points, Germany in fifth with 9, Denmark also in fourth with 9. They're tied with Germany. Once again, the winner of their game tomorrow will decide the fourth spot in Group B. Then Norway in sixth place with 4 points, Hungary in Hungary in seventh place with 3 points, and Kazakhstan in 8th place with 3 points. Remember that Hungary also has the tiebreaker over Kazakhstan, which is going to be a pretty big determiner of what's to come. So a little bit of quick kind of math that's going to happen tomorrow for the games. As far as the top spot in Group A goes, you'll see here that, of course, Sweden, Canada, those two teams, if either team wins in regulation, or if Sweden wins or forces to overtime, Sweden will be the top spot if they win or force overtime. For Canada, if they win in regulation, they will get the top spot. If Canada loses in regulation and Finland were to win in regulation against the Slovaks, they will be the second spot. Canada will move down to the third spot. Latvia and Austria will play tomorrow. Austria will need to win in regulation to get the fourth spot. Any other result will lead to Latvia being the team in the fourth spot in the quarterfinals. And making the quarterfinals, fourth spot in Group A. Slovakia is already out, so they really don't have much to play for. Slovenia and France, both in Group A, are already locked in. They've played their games. Then over to Group B with the Czechs. The USA, they will play each other tomorrow. The US does win in regulation. They will jump the Czechs. Any other result will likely see the Czechs in the top spot. though that's kind of what's to come. Switzerland likely will get all their points tomorrow. So if the Czechs win their game, they will become most likely the top spot in Group B. If the Czechs win in any fashion, they will be the top spot in Group B. But for Switzerland, likely going to win their game, so they'll most likely end up with 19 points. So for Czechia, they just have to get to 19 points with the overtime win or the regulation win. As for the U.S., they're looking to win their game in regulation. If they can do that, there is the potential for them to get the top spot in Group B. However, unlikely. If Switzerland were to lose to Kazakhstan in regulation, and the U.S. wins in regulation, they would become the top spot. Czechs would be in second, Switzerland would be in third. So that'll be your top 3 spots for the what-ifs as far as Group B goes. And then the 4th and 5th spot is whoever wins the game between Germany and Denmark. Nice and easy for that one. Then Norway, who should be good as far as getting relegated. I don't expect that to be the case, although they avoid relegation by their win today, so they're locked in there. Hungary is now just waiting for what happens in the Kazakh-Switzerland game tomorrow. Kazakhstan gets a point. Hungary will be the team relegated. Kazakhstan doesn't get a point, loses in regulation. Kazakhstan will be the team who gets relegated. So lots to play for in A and B. We'll now take a look at the games. We'll start here in Group A. Latvia, Austria. Remember, Austria needs the win in regulation in order to move into the quarterfinals. And this has been a tournament to remember for this Austrian team. And they've played some really, really good games at this tournament. And it would be a real shame, especially the way that they've played. And you kind of look at what they've done so far at this tournament, that they wouldn't be in the conversation. And I think what we've seen from Austria is a well-played, well-structured team that plays and finds the back of the net well. I think you're going to need to see a big game out of Marco Kasper if Austria wants any shot at this game. And then for Latvia, they've played really well, especially their last couple games where we've seen them blow the doors off of a team like Slovakia, who's a tough out at this tournament. This is what it's going to come down to. And we've already seen, of course, Austria knock out, beat Slovakia. These are the games you need to win if you want to be considered a contender for the quarterfinals, and I think they very well are. And now it's just a matter of which team comes out to play. Expect some desperation from Austria. Expect some desperation out of Latvia. It should be a good game. Remember, Austria does need the regulation win in order to move on to the quarterfinals. So that's coming up at 6:20 a.m. Eastern. Then to the second game of the day between Finland and Slovakia. Slovakia, nothing to play for in this game, but the big one for Finland is the potential to move into the second spot. And I think there is a very good possibility that Sweden does beat Canada tomorrow. And it hurts me to say, I know you can see the Canada jersey sitting front and center behind me, but it is a reality that there is a decent shot that, Sweden will beat Canada tomorrow, which means the second spot in Group A is well up for grabs. And as much as Group B is a question mark, I think if you're the Finns, you'd much rather play a team like the U.S., who has a little bit of less structure in their game compared to, a team like a Czechia or Switzerland. I think if you can find that, you'll be okay at this tournament. So for Finland, if they can win their game tomorrow, and we'll talk about the next game in just a second here, but all of a sudden it's a lot more interesting for this Finnish team, who I think has a decent shot to beat a team like the U.S. And then the third game of the day between Canada and Sweden at 2:20 p.m. Eastern. This will be a game, I think, for this Canadian team that is going to be a momentum shifter for them. And we just saw them play against a real tough Finnish team. They didn't look, terribly great. They weren't able to generate their chances quite like we've seen. This game against Sweden will be a little bit more open. We'll see what they can do with that. 2:20 for Sweden, continuing to play their game. They've played well at this tournament. They've been finding their groove lately. Now it's just a matter of, forgetting about what happened earlier in that middle part. If you can avoid those kind of mistakes, being too pretty with the puck, you'll be okay. If you continue to play too pretty, Canada is going to burn you. So should be an interesting game, 2:20 p.m. Eastern. The games of the day, they're really all of them. I'd say Latvia, Austria is a big one. It's probably my game of the day in Group A, although Canada, Sweden is always a good game, no matter the time slot. So I'll say those two games for Group A. The Finland-Slovakia game I really want to take as well, but, it wouldn't be a game of the day if I take all three. Then we'll move over to Group B now. We'll start here at 6:20 between Switzerland and Kazakhstan. Remember, Kazakhstan needs a point to avoid relegation. I don't expect that to happen. I think Switzerland's going to walk all over them, especially early. But if the Kazakhs can kind of hold Switzerland through the first period and a half, 2 periods, then it might be interesting. But if they, if Switzerland can get going early or sort of into the middle parts of this game, they're going to walk away with it. So after the second period, the game's close, could be interesting, but I would expect that game to be, 3-4, 5-0-1, whatever it might be for the Swiss. So should be interesting there, 6:20 a.m. Then the second game of the day, probably going to be second game of the day in Group B. I really want to take it between the Czechs and the USA. I think the Czechs are going to win this game, and I know if you look at the betting books right now, they all have the US, but I firmly believe that the Czechs are going to win this game. They've looked very good at this tournament. You look at their game against Germany today, which just reinforces that fact. They're a very good team at this tournament, and now it's just a matter of putting it to the medal. 10:20 a.m. Eastern between Czechia and the USA. Then to the third game we go between Germany and Denmark. Winner take all for the fourth spot in Group B. Chance at the quarterfinals. Do I have to say anything more? It's going to be a great game. You have Denmark at home playing in front of their home fans. Germany, who's been at this tournament, who's smoked some of the lower end teams in Group B, who I would consider Norway, a team very close to Denmark in their skill level. Yes, the score didn't reflect that, but you look at the way the two teams are whatever the word is, put together. I just think that this game is going to surprise some folks. And Germany, I think, is going to come out guns a-blazing, but if they don't, the longer this game goes, the more it's going to favor Denmark. And this game can stay close sort of through the first 2 periods. Denmark could very well walk away with this game, and it's just going to come down to which team I think is going to end up scoring first and which team's going to set that momentum, because that Danish crowd is a powder keg ready to explode. So for Germany, take them out early. And they'll be okay, but if they start to let Denmark back into the game, that's where bad things happen. So games of the day in Group A, you're going to see Canada and Sweden at 2:20, Austria and Latvia at 6:20 a.m. Games of the day in Group B, Czechia and the USA at 10:20 and 2:20 between Germany and Denmark. Lots to play for tomorrow. We'll break all of it down, as well as preview the quarterfinals and as well the playoff picture, because we are right around the corner. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you realize you're subscribing, tell all your friends about it down below your thoughts on Day 11 of the Men's Championship. Until next time,